Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to tell the story of a good bill gone wrong. When this House met in 2020, there were a number of major policy considerations on the table. The then majority was deeply concerned about the role of law enforcement in our society and the number of students who were being referred to law enforcement by school officials. And to their credit, Mr. Speaker, they brought forward what was a reasonable solution in House Bill 257. After much work, this body passed it with overwhelming bipartisan support. It gave principals needed leeway in reporting misdemeanors involving alcohol and drugs at schools, and it was a step in the right direction. And as a former school board member who really wanted that flexibility for our young people and a parent, I voted in support of House Bill 257. But Mr. Speaker, that bill went to the Senate, and that's where things took an unfortunate turn. The members of the other body added an ill-considered amendment with little discussion that resulted in a frightening and dangerous piece of legislation for our children. That legislation ended mandatory reporting for sexual battery in schools. It ended mandatory reporting for stalking, and it ended mandatory reporting for threats against teachers and staff. It did not take a crystal ball to figure out what would happen next, and Republicans warned that this legislation would make our children less safe and voted against it. It's this optional reporting that opened the door for Loudoun County officials to keep the first of the infamous attacks in Loudoun County quiet. If school officials don't think the assault rises to the level of a felony, they don't have to bring it to law enforcement. Mr. Speaker, since 2020, we've been listening to parents, and we promised to protect all children across Virginia when we came back to this body. Now, we're ready to fulfill these promises and reinstate the common sense reporting provisions that were removed in 2020. We had bipartisan support when House Bill 257 left this body before the Senate destroyed our bipartisan work to address and reduce the number of children being arrested in our schools. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report that we have addressed that bipartisan issue by returning the legislation to the posture it was in when it left the House in 2020 and headed to the other body. This bill does not require the reporting to law enforcement of misdemeanors involving alcohol, marijuana, a controlled substance, an imitation-controlled substance, or an anabolic steroid on a school bus, on school property, or at a school-sponsored activity, including the theft or attempted theft of student prescription medications. Nonetheless, it restores the requirement to report crimes, even misdemeanor-level offenses of sexual battery, threats, stalking, abduction, stabbing, cutting, wounding of others. This is a reasonable place to land. It gives our principals and administrators flexibility in dealing with the most common types of offenses committed at schools while restoring a genuine safeguard removed by the previous bill. But most importantly, it keeps faith with parents who have trusted us to restore sanity to the discipline situation at our schools and to see that their children are protected from violence. And while I'm disappointed that the vote to advance this bill was not unanimous, I am heartened to see that members across the aisle have joined us in fixing this bad situation. And I am hopeful that we will continue to gain more and more support in protecting our children. We made a promise to the parents of Virginia to protect your children, and we are working hard to keep that promise. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.